Welcome to Think Global, your source for in-depth analysis and coverage of global events. What's something people don't know about the Gaza Strip? The Gaza Strip, a small coastal enclave, has been a flashpoint of conflict between Israel and Hamas for years. The latest war between Israel and Hamas erupted after a series of escalating events, including the eviction of Palestinian families in East Jerusalem and clashes at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Hamas, the militant group ruling Gaza, launched rockets into Israel, prompting a fierce military response. The conflict quickly escalated, leading to widespread destruction and significant loss of life on both sides. The West Bank, a landlocked territory nestled between Israel and Jordan, has long been a focal point of conflict. For decades, Israelis and Palestinians have clashed over this disputed land, their hopes for peace repeatedly shattered by violence. In recent months, tensions have soared to new heights, plunging the region into a deadly spiral of unrest. The latest chapter in this seemingly intractable conflict began with a series of Palestinian attacks on Israeli civilians. These attacks, often targeting buses, cafes, and other public places, instilled fear and anger in the Israeli public, fueling demands for a forceful response. The Israeli government, under pressure to ensure the safety of its citizens, vowed to crack down on what it called Palestinian terrorism. The situation escalated further following a deadly attack on Israeli settlers near the West Bank settlement of Eli. Gunmen opened fire on a car carrying a family, killing 4 people, including a 12-year-old boy. The attack sent shockwaves through Israeli society, prompting calls for swift and decisive action. In response to the surge in violence, the Israeli military launched a major operation in the West Bank, the largest of its kind in over 2 decades. The roots of this conflict trace back to the early 20th century, with the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 and the subsequent displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. Over the decades, multiple wars, intifadas, and peace processes have failed to resolve the core issues, leaving both sides entrenched in a cycle of violence and retaliation. The recent surge in violence is a stark reminder of the deep-seated grievances and unresolved tensions that continue to fuel this enduring conflict. In the past few weeks, several significant incidents have further escalated tensions. A series of Israeli airstrikes targeted key Hamas infrastructure, resulting in numerous casualties and widespread damage. The impact on local communities has been devastating, with many families losing their homes and access to basic necessities. In response, Hamas has intensified its rocket attacks on Israeli cities, causing widespread fear and disruption to daily life. The Israeli military has conducted numerous raids in the West Bank, arresting dozens of suspected militants and seizing weapons caches. The human toll of this conflict is immense, with both Israeli and Palestinian communities mourning the loss of loved ones and calling for an end to the violence. International efforts to mediate the conflict have intensified, but a lasting resolution remains elusive as both sides remain deeply entrenched in their positions. Operation Home and Garden marked a significant escalation in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. For the first time in years, Israeli forces used airstrikes and armored bulldozers in a densely populated urban environment, raising fears of widespread civilian casualties. The operation, which lasted for several days, involved hundreds of Israeli troops, backed by helicopters and drones. The Israeli government justified the operation as a necessary measure to root out Palestinian militants and prevent future attacks. The Israeli military claimed that Jenin had become a hotbed of terrorism, harboring those responsible for planning and carrying out attacks against Israelis. Palestinian officials condemned the operation as a war crime, accusing Israel of using disproportionate force and targeting civilians. They argued that the operation was part of a broader Israeli policy to suppress Palestinian resistance and maintain its control over the West Bank. The operation quickly transformed Jenin into a war zone, with explosions, gunfire, and the roar of military vehicles echoing through the streets. Residents, trapped in their homes, huddled in fear as the fighting raged around them. The primary objective of Operation Home and Garden was to dismantle militant networks and infrastructure within Jenin. Israeli forces conducted numerous raids, capturing key militants and confiscating large caches of weapons. The strategy also included establishing checkpoints and roadblocks to control movement and prevent reinforcements from reaching the militants. Amidst the conflict, efforts were made to provide humanitarian aid and medical assistance to affected civilians and to evacuate those in immediate danger. In the aftermath, Both sides faced the challenge of rebuilding and addressing the deep-seated tensions that the operation had exacerbated. Key figures involved in the operation included Major General Yoav Mordecai, who oversaw the strategic planning and execution of the mission. Specific incidents during the operation included targeted raids on suspected militant hideouts, resulting in the capture of high-profile figures such as Abu Jihad, a known leader in the militant network. The impact on the local population was severe, with many families displaced and homes destroyed, leading to a humanitarian crisis in the region. The international community reacted strongly, with the United Nations and various human rights organizations condemning the operation and calling for an immediate ceasefire. The long-term consequences of Operation Home and Garden remain uncertain, as both sides continue to grapple with the aftermath and the ongoing conflict in the region.
Jenin, a city with a long history of resistance to Israeli occupation, became the epicenter of the conflict. The city's refugee camp, home to thousands of Palestinians displaced during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, was a particular focus of the Israeli operation. The camp, a labyrinth of narrow streets and makeshift shelters, posed significant challenges for the Israeli military. Militants, using the camp's cramped alleyways to their advantage, engaged in fierce gun battles with Israeli soldiers. Key players in the battle included Israeli military commanders who meticulously planned the operation and Palestinian militant groups determined to resist. The Israeli military employed advanced tactics, including the use of drones for surveillance and targeted airstrikes to weaken militant positions. Palestinian militants countered with guerrilla tactics, setting up ambushes, constructing makeshift barricades, and utilizing underground tunnels. As the fighting intensified, the camp suffered extensive damage. Homes were reduced to rubble, businesses were destroyed, and vital infrastructure, including water and electricity lines, was severed. The United Nations estimated that over 400 Palestinian homes were damaged or destroyed during the operation. The Israeli military claimed that it took precautions to minimize civilian casualties, using targeted airstrikes and warning residents to evacuate before launching ground offensives. However, Palestinian witnesses disputed these claims, accusing Israel of indiscriminate shelling and firing on fleeing civilians. The impact on the local population was devastating, with humanitarian aid workers struggling to provide assistance to the injured and displaced. Jenin has long been a flashpoint in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, with significant battles taking place over the decades, each leaving a lasting impact on the city's landscape and its people. Personal stories from Jenin residents highlight the human cost of the conflict. One resident, Fatima, recalls the terror of fleeing her home with her children as gunfire erupted around them. "We had to leave everything behind," Fatima says, her voice trembling. "Our home, our memories, everything was destroyed in an instant." Despite the devastation, the people of Jenin continue to show resilience, with aid workers and local organizations working tirelessly to rebuild and provide support to those affected. The battle for Jenin is not just a story of military strategy and conflict, but also one of human endurance and the unyielding spirit of a community determined to rise from the ashes.
Caught in the crossfire of this latest eruption of violence were ordinary Palestinians, families, shopkeepers, students, whose lives were upended by the fighting. Their stories offer a poignant reminder of the human cost of this enduring conflict. Muhammad, a mother of 5, described the terror she felt as Israeli bulldozers tore through her neighborhood, reducing homes to rubble. "We were trapped inside with nowhere to go," she said. "The children were screaming, and we didn't know if we would make it out alive." Abu Ahmad, an elderly shopkeeper, watched in despair as his livelihood was destroyed. "I spent my whole life building this business," he said, gesturing to the wreckage of his shop. "Now it's all gone. I don't know how I'm going to start over." These stories of fear, loss, and resilience are repeated throughout Jenin and the surrounding areas. The operation left a trail of devastation in its wake, shattering lives and deepening the sense of despair among Palestinians. International organizations have stepped in to provide much-needed humanitarian aid, but the scale of the crisis is overwhelming. Medical teams are working around the clock to treat the injured, often in makeshift hospitals with limited supplies. Children and families are receiving food, water, and other essentials, but the need far exceeds the available resources. Aid workers emphasize the urgent need for more support and call on the international community to step up their efforts. Despite the immense challenges, the resilience of the Palestinian people shines through as they begin the arduous task of rebuilding their lives.
The Israeli military operation in Jenin drew widespread international condemnation, with many countries and organizations expressing alarm at the scale of the violence and the impact on civilians. The United Nations condemned the operation as excessive use of force and called for an independent investigation into possible war crimes. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, expressed grave concern over the high number of civilian casualties and the disproportionate use of force by Israeli forces. The International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, voiced alarm at the humanitarian situation in Jenin, stating that the fighting had made it extremely difficult to provide medical care to the wounded and deliver essential aid to those in need. The United States, while expressing support for Israel's right to defend itself, urged restraint and called for a de-escalation of the violence. The European Union also expressed deep concern, emphasizing the need for a peaceful resolution and respect for international law. The Arab League condemned the operation, calling it a violation of Palestinian rights and urging international intervention. Russia criticized the operation, highlighting the potential for increased regional instability. China called for immediate cessation of hostilities and stressed the importance of dialogue and negotiation. The broader geopolitical implications of the conflict have raised concerns about regional stability and the potential for further escalation. Historically, the international community has been deeply involved in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, with numerous UN resolutions and peacekeeping missions aimed at resolving the tensions. Key global leaders, including the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, have called for renewed efforts towards a two-state solution, emphasizing the need for sustained dialogue. The geopolitical stakes are high, with the potential for international sanctions and diplomatic fallout if the conflict escalates further. Humanitarian organizations worldwide have mobilized to provide aid, highlighting the urgent need for a ceasefire and long-term peace. The historical context underscores the complexity of the conflict and the critical role of international diplomacy in seeking a lasting resolution.
The Israeli military operation in Jenin had profound humanitarian repercussions for both communities. The Palestinian Ministry of Economy estimated that the operation caused millions of dollars in damages to infrastructure and businesses, with over 200 buildings destroyed. Many Palestinians lost their livelihoods, with unemployment rates soaring to over 50% and families struggling to make ends meet. Ahmad, a shop owner in Jenin, saw his business reduced to rubble. He now relies on aid to support his family of 6. In Israel, the rocket fire from Gaza disrupted economic activities, causing significant losses for businesses in affected areas, with damages estimated at $50 million. The social fabric of Jenin was deeply affected, with thousands of Palestinians displaced and reliant on humanitarian aid. Over 5,000 people were forced to leave their homes. The Al-Hassan family, now living in a temporary shelter, struggles daily with limited access to food and clean water. For Israelis, the constant threat of rocket attacks led to increased stress and anxiety, impacting mental health and community cohesion. Over 1,000 civilians sought psychological support. The conflict also disrupted education, with many schools in Jenin damaged or destroyed, affecting the future prospects of over 10,000 Palestinian children. Youssef, a 10-year-old student, dreams of becoming a doctor, but his school lies in ruins and his education is on hold. The operation underscored the economic burden of security measures for Israel, with increased military spending straining the national budget by an additional $100 million. Despite the challenges, there were calls for economic cooperation and rebuilding efforts, highlighting the desire for a more stable and prosperous future for both sides.
Daily life for Palestinians in the West Bank is marked by numerous restrictions and challenges imposed by the Israeli military occupation. Movement is heavily restricted, with Palestinians often having to navigate multiple checkpoints just to go to school, work, or visit family. The Israeli military controls all aspects of life, from the issuance of permits to the construction of homes and businesses, making daily activities a constant struggle. Despite these challenges, Palestinians have developed coping mechanisms, relying on community support and resilience to maintain a semblance of normalcy. Arbitrary arrests, Detentions without trial and home demolitions are common, adding to the daily stress and uncertainty. Yet, through cultural events, local traditions, and community gatherings, Palestinians continue to preserve their identity and resist the pressures of occupation.
Section 8. The search for peace. Despite the recent violence in Jenin, efforts to achieve peace continue. Various stakeholders are actively engaged in seeking a resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The two-state solution remains a central focus, with numerous diplomatic efforts aimed at reviving this approach. The international community, including the United Nations, has been instrumental in pushing for renewed negotiations and peace talks. Key initiatives involve direct negotiations between Israeli and Palestinian leaders, as well as grassroots efforts by non-governmental organizations and community leaders. Economic and humanitarian projects are also being implemented to improve conditions in the West Bank and foster a more conducive environment for peace. Programs targeting youth, interfaith dialogues, and cultural exchanges are crucial in building trust and reducing radicalization, laying the groundwork for a sustainable peace.
Section 9. A glimmer of hope? Despite the grim realities on the ground, there are still those who hold out hope for peace. Recently, several new initiatives have emerged, aiming to foster understanding and cooperation. Civil society organizations on both sides continue to work tirelessly to build bridges of understanding and promote dialogue. These organizations, often working in the face of significant obstacles, are engaged in a range of activities, from promoting dialogue and reconciliation to providing humanitarian assistance and advocating for human rights. One notable development is the recent peace-building workshop that brought together youth leaders from both sides. While their efforts may seem small in the face of such a deeply entrenched conflict, they offer a glimmer of hope that a different future is possible.
Section 10. The future of the West Bank. The future of the West Bank is shaped by a complex interplay of political, social, and economic factors. Politically, the region faces uncertainty, with the potential for further violence remaining high. The international community's involvement is crucial in mediating peace and preventing further bloodshed. Renewed diplomatic efforts are needed to address the root causes of the conflict and foster a just and lasting peace. Socially, the commitment to ending the occupation and resolving settlement issues is vital. The future must also consider the economic development of the region, ensuring opportunities for growth and cooperation between both communities.
Section 11. A call for justice. The recent violence in Jenin is a tragic reminder of the urgent need for peace and justice in the Holy Land. The international community must not stand idly by while this conflict continues to claim innocent lives and undermine the prospects for a peaceful future. The time for action is now. The world must demand an end to the occupation, an end to the violence, and a just and lasting peace for all. Together, we can build a future where justice prevails and peace is a reality for everyone. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Think Global for more updates on world affairs.